The Revolutionary Wars of France, 1794. 1794 arrived with no material change in France's military situation. French efforts to invade the Piedmont on the Alps front were beaten back, but the French were able to push the Spanish out of French territory across the Pyrenees and began their own invasion of Spanish Catalonia. It was the northern front, however, which remained the decisive theater of war, with the highest threat to the continued existence of France. The French Army of the North, now commanded by General Charles Pichegru, had begun offensive operations from the city of Lille towards the northeast with approximately 80,000 men. The enemy coalition of Austrian, British, and Hanoverian troops also planned operations along the coast towards Dunkirk and further inland at Mons. Seeing the French push between these two coalition operations, the Austrian Prince of Saxe-Coburg and the British Duke of York attempted to concentrate their forces and attack the French from multiple sides. The result was the battles of Turquois and Tournai in May of 1794. The Battle of Turquois occurred on 18 May and saw 75,000 coalition troops facing 70,000 French along the River Lys. The French forces were arrayed in two lines, one along the river facing north against the oncoming Austrians under General Clerfayt, and the other arrayed against the combined Austrian, British, and Hanoverian forces approaching from the south under Saxe-Coburg and the Duke of York. The coalition plan was for Clerfayt to attack across the river, while the Duke of York made the main attack towards Turquois, assisted by a secondary Austrian attack further south. Clerfayt was delayed by French forces crossing the river and was unable to push very far in support of the British. The Austrian forces in the south did not move very effectively and were also no help to the British. The French had managed to pull back and concentrate their troops around Turquois, and it took the British almost all day to take the town. British attacks on the French left flank were less successful, and the French counterattacked Turquois from two directions and pushed the British and Hanoverian forces out of the town, the Hanoverians in particular suffering enormous losses. Despite the near parity in total numbers, the French were able to use all of their numbers in the battle, while the coalition only managed to get two-thirds of their forces into the fight. The coalition suffered over 5,000 casualties and lost many of their cannons due to their rapid retreat, so rapid that the Duke of York himself was almost captured. The French suffered the loss of 3,000 soldiers. The coalition forces drew off to the south towards the town of Tournai. The French forces did not immediately pursue, but followed up the coalition forces a few days later, leading to the Battle of Tournai on 22 May. The coalition forces had occupied defensive positions around Tournai and waited to see what the French would do. Only a portion of the coalition forces were present at Tournai, approximately 28,000, while the remainder occupied other positions to resist further French offenses. Pichegru's army was still disorganized from the victory at Turquois, and he had less than 50,000 soldiers on hand. Pichegru determined this was enough, and he planned to penetrate the coalition lines and lever them out of Tournai, but the defenses were too stout. Numerous French attacks were made on the village of Pontachin, but each was beat back, and Pichegru decided to retreat. The lost numbers were the reverse of the previous battle, with the French suffering over 5,000 casualties and the coalition losing approximately 3,000. Along with the ground war, France was also fighting at sea. The siege of Toulon had cost France some of her warships, but she still possessed a respectable navy. The British Royal Navy remained the largest navy in the world, but French ships were often of a superior design, and France remained a threat. One of the many pressing concerns facing the French government was the ability to feed her large population. An important naval battle occurred in 1794 around efforts to address this food shortage, and while it was a military defeat, it was a nutritional victory. The British would call the battle the Glorious 1st of June, and it would be the first and largest naval battle of the French Revolutionary War period. The battle stemmed from French efforts to bring a grain convoy from the United States to France and British efforts to intercept. The British Channel Fleet under Admiral Lord Richard Howe had a strength of 25 ships of the line, while the French Atlantic Fleet under Admiral Villeray de Joyeuse had 26, and the battle occurred approximately 350 miles west of the French island of Ouessant off the port city of Brest. Howe's fleet secured a position upwind of the French, allowing him to dictate how the battle would be fought. Howe intended to penetrate the French line of battle like Nelson would do 10 years in the future, but his signals were not well understood by his captains, and the battle dissolved into an unorganized general melee. The French suffered greater casualties, with 6 ships being lost and upwards of 4,000 sailors becoming casualties, while the British suffered the loss of no ships and 1,200 casualties. Nevertheless, both fleets were too disorganized and damaged to continue, and both retreated to port. The French grain convoy remained undetected and safely reached port on the 12th of June. The decisive battle of the campaign against the Austrian Netherlands occurred on June 26, 1794. After the seesaw battles of May, the French Army of the North was reinforced by 2 smaller armies, and the overall command was given to General Jean-Baptiste Jourdan, who had been recalled from his forced retirement. Now, with almost 100,000 men, Jourdan moved to invest the fortified city of Charleroi. After being pushed back by an Austrian-Dutch force of only half his strength, Jourdan was able to take Charleroi on 25 June, 1 day before a relieving force of Austrians under Field Marshal Coburg, not the Prince of Saxe-Coburg, arrived to reinforce the Austrian-Dutch forces in the area. The coalition forces numbered about 60,000 troops, while Jourdan had a little over 80,000 immediately available. Despite this, Coburg planned an attack intended to cave in both French flanks before the main attack hit the French center, the classic double envelopment attack favored by many generals of the time. The coalition attacks on the flanks were successful and drove the French forces back, but the French center held and even counterattacked. Coburg did not continue the attacks on the flanks, and uncertain of what else to do, he retreated to the north, leaving the battlefield to the French. The losses were about even, with both sides losing between 5,000 and 6,000 casualties, although the coalition casualties have been disputed. An interesting aspect of the Battle of Fleurus, as the battle was called, is that it is the first example of battlefield aerial reconnaissance, as can be seen in the Jean-Baptiste Mauzais's painting from 1837. The French possessed a reconnaissance balloon which provided some information to General Jourdan as to enemy movements. In one sense, the Battle of Fleurus was a tactical draw, even though the French remained on the field while the coalition retreated. Strategically, the battle was decisive. Austria decided the cost to retain the Austrian Netherlands was too high, and they withdrew their forces. The French now occupied the entire area, present-day Belgium mostly, and prepared to continue north into Holland. By the end of the year, the French had occupied all territory up to the Rhine River, Belgium, and a good portion of Holland. For all intents and purposes, the French northern front was now secure. Another outcome of the Battle of Fleurus was that with the threat of invasion now a thing of the past, the excesses of the Reign of Terror now seemed to be unnecessary. The arrest and execution of Robespierre in July sparked more reaction against the Committee of Public Safety, creating the Thermidorian reaction and eventually the end of rule by National Convention in the formation of the French Directory in late 1795. 1794 was a year of victory for the French. While she had not won every battle, France had won the campaign for the Austrian Netherlands, and the border was secure to the north and east. The worst aspects of revolutionary zeal were also on the wane. The brutal conduct of the Committee of Public Safety had done what was necessary to ensure the survival of the revolution in its early days, and as the revolution matured, it was discarded for the next stage of political control. Now that the defense of France was successful, France could push to establish her natural borders of the Pyrenees, the Alps, the Rhine, and beyond.